The wreckage did not look like a ship anymore. It looked like something had bitten through the hull in 3 places and then lost interest. Plates of reinforced alloy were bent outward in ways that made no engineering sense. Entire sections of the CGV Relentless Star had simply ceased to exist, replaced by ragged holes through which stars were now clearly visible. The ship had been a mid-range coalition frigate, 200 meters from bow to stern, carrying a crew of 112. It had dropped out of faster-than-light travel 6 hours into a routine corridor transit and never checked in again. The rescue ship found it 38 hours later. Lieutenant Vora said stood at the viewing port and looked at the debris field without speaking for a long moment. She was Velhari, which meant her bones were light and her instincts were cautious. Velhari did not last long on the frontier by being careless. She had responded to crash sites before. She had seen what vacuum and fire and explosive decompression did to organic matter. She had written the reports. She had learned to keep her voice steady when she filed them. She told herself she was ready for this one. She was not ready for this one. Thermal scan, she said to her crew. The results came back in under a minute. 111 life signs, absent. 1 life sign, present. Sector 7, Compartment 4, engine adjacent storage. The crew looked at each other. That section should be slag, said the ship's engineer, a stocky Durith named Fun. He pulled up the schematic on his screen and pointed at the relevant compartment. The cascade breach went through this whole aft quarter. Temperatures in that corridor would have hit 4,000 degrees at peak. Nothing survives 4,000 degrees. Something did, Vora said. They suited up and went in. The compartment was sealed from the inside. That was the first thing that struck Vora as wrong. The door mechanism was manual, an old-style wheel lock, and it had been turned with enough force to leave stress marks in the metal. Whoever was inside had not been fleeing the disaster. They had found a room, gotten in, and locked it behind them with intent. Fun cut through the seal. The door swung open. The man sitting on the floor looked up at them. He was human. That explained several things and complicated several more. He was large, the way humans tended to be, with broad shoulders and a face that had seen a number of outdoor environments and not been gentle about it. He had a burn across the left side of his neck that looked like it had happened some time ago and had since stopped bleeding on its own. His left hand was wrapped around his right forearm in a way that suggested a fracture somewhere beneath. He was sitting with his back against the wall, knees up, completely still. His expression was not the expression of a man who had just spent 38 hours alone in a destroyed ship surrounded by the vacuum of space. He looked like he had been waiting for a bus. Sergeant Darian Cole, he said. Coalition Special Recon, attached as observer to the Relentless Star. You people took a while. Vora opened her mouth, closed it, and then said the only thing she could reasonably say. Are you injured? Darian looked down at his arm. Cracked something in the fall. Ribs are bruised. There is a burn on my neck that I cannot fully see, but it does not feel serious. He paused. I am somewhat cold. The medical officer, a young Velhari named Cass, pushed past Vora and began scanning him with a diagnostic wand. Her face went through several changes as the results came in. She said nothing, which was, in Vora's experience, never a good sign. Later, in the medical bay, Cass pulled Vora aside and showed her the scan results. 1 fractured ulna. 3 cracked ribs. A second-degree burn covering approximately 12% of the neck and upper shoulder. Mild systemic hypothermia. Blood pressure slightly elevated, which the baseline charts say is actually normal for humans under physical stress. She paused. He also has a pre-existing injury to the left knee that he did not mention. Is he going to be all right? Vora asked. He is going to be fine, Cass said. She said it the way a person says something they do not entirely believe. By human medical baselines, none of this is serious. He would be hospitalized for 2 days and released. Our crew members would not have survived the thermal event in that compartment. Our crew members would not have survived 38 hours in there on a sealed emergency oxygen supply. Our crew members would not have survived any one of 3 different things this man lived through this week. She looked at the scan results again. He told me his biggest concern is that he lost his data pad in the crash. Vora went back to interview him. He sat in the medical bay chair like it was an ordinary chair in an ordinary room and answered her questions with the patient economy of a man who had been debriefed many times before. He described the initial cascade event, a sound he did not recognize coming from below decks, then a pressure change, then the hull breach. He had been in the aft corridor when it happened. He had moved fast, found the storage compartment, sealed it. He described this the way someone might describe finding a seat on a crowded transport. After that, Vora asked. After that I waited, he said. For 38 hours. Yes. Alone. He paused. Just a fraction of a second. Yes. She noted the pause. She did not know what to do with it yet. Did you hear anything? She asked. After the crash. Anything moving in the wreckage? He looked at her steadily. Ships make noise when they break apart. Metal contracts in vacuum. Things settle. I heard all of that. Anything else? He considered this. I thought I heard something moving. In the first few hours. I assumed it was debris shifting. It stopped after a while. Vora wrote this down. She thanked him. She left. The recovery drone she had sent to document the sealed compartment finished its sweep while she was walking back to the bridge. Its atmospheric sensor report came through on her handheld screen. She read it once, stopped walking, and read it again. The compartment had held breathable atmosphere for 38 hours. That part was expected. The emergency seal and the oxygen reserves in the room accounted for it. What was not expected was the carbon dioxide reading. The drone had measured the residual gas ratios before the compartment was opened. Carbon dioxide was the byproduct of respiration. The amount of it in that sealed room was consistent with 2 breathing organisms. Not 1. 2. Vora stood in the corridor of her rescue ship and looked at the number on her screen for a long time. Then she looked through the open door to the medical bay, where Sergeant Darian Cole was drinking a cup of water and staring at nothing in particular. He did not look like a man with a secret. He looked like a man who was simply waiting, as he had apparently been waiting for 38 hours, with complete and unbothered patience, for whatever came next. She put the sensor report in her mission log. She flagged it for review. She did not go back and ask him about it. Not yet. The file was 4 gigabytes of audio, and nobody wanted to listen to it. That was Investigator Len's first impression when the case arrived on her desk at Coalition Fleet Station Drell 4. The attached notes from Lieutenant Vora said were brief and professionally worded, but Len had worked enough of these reviews to read the tone beneath the words. The note said, anomalous atmospheric readings from crash site, flagged for analysis. What it meant was, I saw something I do not understand, and I want someone else to confirm I am not imagining it. Len was Durith. Her species had evolved on a world of dense fog and chemical uncertainty, where precise measurement was the difference between eating and being eaten. She had 12 sensory organs that humans did not, 6 of which were useful in her current profession, and she had never once in her career filed a report that was factually incorrect. She was also, by her own private assessment, one of the few investigators in the fleet who was not instinctively terrified of the human military personnel they occasionally had to deal with. She was simply very careful around them. She pulled up the audio file. 4 gigabytes. 38 hours of passive recording from the helmet of Sergeant Darian Cole, logged automatically from the moment he sealed himself in compartment 4 of the Relentless Star until the moment the rescue team opened the door. She set the playback to 4 times speed and put on her headset. The first 2 hours were simple. The sound of a human breathing. Steady. Unhurried. Occasional small sounds of movement. Things being shifted. The man settling into position. At one point, there was a long, low sound that she had to look up because she did not have the reference in her memory. She found it after a moment. He had been humming. An old Earth sound pattern, tuneless and quiet, the kind of thing organisms did to comfort themselves in the dark. She noted the time stamp and moved on. The next several hours were more of the same. Breathing. Occasional movement. 2 distinct sleep periods where his respiration deepened and slowed. She noted the duration. 6 hours the first time, 5.5 the second. She noted the regularity. She noted that he did not make distress sounds, did not speak urgently, did not pound on the door or call for help. He slept like a man in his own bed, in a destroyed ship, surrounded by hard vacuum. 38 hours from rescue. She took a short break and drank something warm and thought about what it meant to have evolved on a world where that kind of calm was a survival trait. Then she went back to the audio. At hour 13, she found the anomaly. It was subtle enough that she almost missed it at 4 times speed. She caught it only because her secondary auditory organs were still processing the background texture of the file, even while she was thinking about something else. She stopped. She rewound 40 seconds. She played it again at normal speed. There it was. Beneath Darian's breathing. Not loud, not close, but present in the audio with the unmistakable quality of something real and physical. A second respiratory pattern. Slower than his. Deeper. The rhythm was different enough to be clearly distinct, similar enough to respiration that it could not be mistaken for mechanical noise. It was not air from a vent. It was not the ship settling. It was not recording artifact. Something had been breathing in that compartment with him. Lynn pulled the file into her analysis suite and ran a full audio separation. It took the system 11 minutes to isolate the two channels cleanly. When it finished, she played them side by side. Darian's breathing on the left, the other pattern on the right. They ran together for 22 hours. Synchronized imperfectly, occasionally overlapping, occasionally diverging, in the way that two living things in the same space would naturally fall into and out of rhythm with each other. She sat with this for a long moment. Then she called two of her colleagues and told them to come look at something. She did not tell them what. She wanted clean second opinions. They both said the same thing she had said. That is two separate breathing patterns. She thanked them and sent them back to their desks. The second respiratory pattern ended at hour 35. Not a fade, not a degradation. It simply stopped, mid-breath, between 1 second and the next, at a timestamp she cross-referenced with the rescue mission log. The rescue ship had docked with the wreckage at that exact time. The moment the outside hull had made contact with the salvage clamps, the second breathing had ceased. Len spent an hour building the timeline. Then she brought it to Admiral Rovaseth. Rovaseth was Senior Fleet Command, Velhari, and not easily shaken. She had commanded 3 engagements in the Corridor Wars and had a reputation for reading a room correctly. She looked at Len's report for 4 minutes without speaking. Len had timed worse silences. Did Cole know? The Admiral asked finally. That was my next question, Len said. She pulled up the audio file to a specific timestamp. Hour 19. She let it play. There was Darian's breathing, steady and even. Then his voice, quiet and unprompted, speaking to nothing visible, to nothing that had responded to him or called out to him. He said, "You do not have to stay in the corner. I am not going to hurt you." Silence. Then, softer, with the easy patience of a man who had already accepted the answer before he gave it. Okay, that is fine too. The audio continued. He did not speak again for another 3 hours. The second breathing pattern was still present, still slow and deep, shifted slightly in the audio space, as if whatever made it had moved from one side of the room to the other. The Admiral stared at the speaker. He talked to it. Yes. And it did not answer. Not in any way the microphone captured. He did not mention this in his debrief. No. When the lieutenant asked him if he had heard anything moving in the wreckage, he said he thought it was debris settling. Len paused. He did not lie exactly. He just did not offer the rest of it. The Admiral sat back. Run the crash data again. I want to know what brought that ship down. Len had already done this. She had been doing it in the background since hour 1, because she was thorough by nature and suspicious by training. She laid the second part of her report on the desk. The hull breach pattern of the Relentless Star was not consistent with a mechanical failure. It was not consistent with a weapon strike. It was consistent, in a way she had never seen before in any database she could access, with something that had pushed outward through the hull from the inside. And then, based on the stress fracture analysis of the secondary breach points, come back in. Something had left the ship, then returned to it. Then the ship had died, and only the human had survived. And whatever came back and had sat in the dark with him for 38 hours, breathing slowly, saying nothing, staying just out of reach. She watched the Admiral's face go through several careful changes. Containment, the Admiral asked. It was gone before we could establish any. The moment the rescue ship docked, the second pattern stopped. We have no trace of it on any scanner aboard the rescue vessel. Whatever it is, it does not appear to want to be detected. But it was detected. By accident, Len said. Because the human's helmet was running and nobody thought to check the background audio of a man sitting alone in a room. The Admiral looked at her for a moment. Where is Cole now? Medical observation, Drell 4, Bay 7. Cleared physically. requesting return to active duty. He has filed the request twice in the past 3 days. He is not going anywhere, the Admiral said. Not until we understand what was in that room with him. Lynn nodded. She gathered her files. At the door she paused, because she was precise and she did not like leaving things unsaid. Admiral, in 38 hours, whatever it was had every opportunity to harm him. I know. It did not. I know that too, investigator. The Admiral picked up the audio report again. That is the part one keep thinking about. The science team reached the relentless star 12 days after the crash, by which point the wreckage had drifted another 4,000 kilometers into the corridor and the temperature at its core had dropped to ambient vacuum. Dr. Sura Meld had requested the assignment herself, which her supervisor had found slightly unusual, because survey work on debris fields was considered the least interesting job in xenobiology, and Sura was considered the most capable researcher in her division. She had not explained her reasons. She had simply filed the request, packed her kit, and boarded the survey vessel before anyone could think too carefully about it. Sura was Durith, like investigator Len, but where Len was precise and contained, Sura was the kind of scientist who moved through a site the way water moved through rock, slowly, finding every crack, leaving nothing unexamined. She had spent 11 years studying life in places where life was not supposed to exist. Gas giant thermal vents, the underside of glaciers on frozen moons, the interior of derelict stations that had been sealed for centuries. She had a talent for finding things that were not on the manifest. She found something not on the manifest. Compartment 4 was intact in a way that the surrounding sections were not. Vorased's report had noted this, but standing inside it, looking at the walls, Sura felt the wrongness of it more clearly. The adjacent corridors had been exposed to the cascade breach. Their surfaces were warped by heat, etched by radiation, stripped down to bare material. Compartment 4 should have looked the same. It did not. The walls were clean. The air seal had held perfectly. The temperature differential between this room and the corridor outside, it was significant. That differential was the first thing she flagged. The crash had happened 12 days ago. The ship had been cooling in vacuum ever since. By any reasonable thermal model, Compartment 4 should have equalized with its surroundings by now. It had not. It was 11 degrees warmer than the corridor. The heating system in this section was offline. There was no power running to this compartment. There was no mechanical explanation for 11 degrees of persistent warmth in a room in a dead ship in open space. She collected air samples, wall swabs, floor material, every surface she could reach. She bagged them, labeled them, and brought them back to the survey vessel's lab. The results came back the following morning, and she read them 3 times before she trusted herself to write anything down. There was biological material in the room that did not belong to Darian Cole. It was not from any member of the Relentless Star's crew, because she had the crew manifest and their species profiles, and this material matched none of them. It was cellular in structure, organic, clearly the product of a living thing. But when she ran it through every database she could access, including the xenobiology archives at Coalition Central that covered 900 cataloged species, she found nothing. No match. No partial match. No near approximation. Whatever had left this material behind was not in the system. She spent 2 days analyzing the cells themselves. They were strange in ways she kept finding new words for. The metabolic markers suggested a creature capable of extremely rapid shifts between active and dormant states. Not sleep, not hibernation, but something more immediate, a deliberate biological switch, like a light being turned off. The cells also showed signs of what she could only describe as controlled decomposition. They had begun breaking themselves down in a way that was methodical, intentional, as though the organism had decided to stop leaving evidence and had simply instructed its own shed material to disappear. The cells were already half dissolved when she found them. Another day, and they would have been gone entirely. She flagged everything and sent the report to Len. Then she went back into the wreck for a second pass, because she was thorough, and because something was nagging at her that she could not name yet. She found the second thing in the far corner of the compartment. It was almost nothing, a slight irregularity in the surface material of the floor, a discoloration, a density change too small to see with the naked eye, and only visible because she was using a deep material scanner. Whatever had been in this room had not just shed cells randomly. It had spent time in this corner. A long time. Long enough to leave a slight compression in the floor material, the kind of thing a heavy presence created over many hours. She stood in the corner and looked across the compartment at the opposite wall, where Darian's biodata from his medical scan had placed him during his longest sleep period. She did a rough calculation of distances. Whatever had been in this corner had been approximately 2.5 meters from the sleeping human for an extended period. It had watched him sleep. She did not put that phrase in her report. She wrote, "Evidence of prolonged stationary presence in the northwest quadrant of the compartment." That was accurate. It was also the most unsettling sentence she had ever put in a professional document. Back at Drell 4, things were not calm. Lynn had shared a sanitized version of the audio report with station security, and station security had shared a sanitized version with facilities management, and somehow the station's maintenance crew had spent a week not quite talking about it while being very obviously aware of something. Station personnel reported to Lynn in ones and twos over the following days, apologetic, clearly uncertain if they were wasting her time. A Velhari technician had heard something near the junction corridor outside Medical Base 7, where Darian was bunked at 0200 station time. Breathing, she said. Low and slow, not from a vent, not from a person. She had checked the corridor. No one was there. 2 lights had failed and reset themselves in the same corridor on 3 separate nights. A diagnostic computer in the adjacent bay had run a full self-check without being prompted and had come back with all systems green, which was not unusual, except that it had also updated its calibration settings in a way that would not have been possible without direct system access, and no technician had been logged into that terminal for 11 hours. Darian was questioned about each of these incidents in turn. His answer was the same each time. Old stations made noise, lights failed, computers did what computers did. He said it without impatience, without defensiveness, without any tell that Lynn could identify. He said it the way someone said a thing that was not the whole truth, but was not exactly a lie either. He was, by all formal metrics, a model detainee. He was polite. He did not complain. He ate what was provided, slept regular hours, exercised in the small recreation bay every morning. He had asked 3 times for access to mission debrief materials so he could write his incident report, which was, technically, still outstanding. She had told him the report could wait. He had accepted this without argument. He was also, clearly, going quietly and completely insane with boredom, and doing so without showing it at all. Lynn had read enough about humans by now to know that this was in itself a form of impressive self-control. Coalition species generally expressed discomfort. Velhari got restless. Durith got precise to the point of rigidity. Even the larger, calmer frontier species showed something when they were confined and inactive. Darian Cole sat in a small room on a station where he was not trusted and not free and not told what was happening, and said, "Old stations make noise," without a single muscle in his face betraying anything. She received Sura's report on day 14 and read it standing up, because she had learned that some reports were better processed while standing. She read the part about synchronized biodata 3 times. Sura had cross-referenced the biological material's residual metabolic trace with Darian's recorded vital signs from his helmet data. For a period of approximately 4 hours on the second night in the compartment, the 2 biological systems had been running at the same rhythm. Not similar, the same, as if they had, over many hours in the same small dark space, begun breathing together. Lynn put down the report and went to speak to the Admiral. She did not know what she was going to say when she got there. She knew that the entity had been in that room for reasons she did not understand. She knew it had not caused harm. She knew it had left the room the moment the outside world arrived, had vanished so cleanly that nothing in the fleet sensor suite had caught it. And she knew, with the certainty of someone who had looked very carefully at very precise data, that whatever it was, it had not gone far. The briefing room was sealed at both ends, which was unusual. Admiral Rovaseth had requested it, which made the 6 officers inside the room quietly aware that whatever was being discussed today was not going in the standard mission log. She stood at the head of the table and looked at the faces around her. Lynn was there with her files stacked neat and ordered. Dr. Sura Meld had come in from the survey vessel that morning, still carrying the slight chill of field work. Dr. Oren Fowl, the Coalition's senior xenopsychologist, had been flown in from Central the previous evening and had spent the journey reviewing everything Lynn had sent him. There was also a fleet security officer named Bren, who said nothing and wrote everything down, and a tactical analyst named Yev, who said nothing and wrote nothing and simply watched. The admiral opened with the question on everyone's mind. Is it dangerous? Nobody answered immediately. That was its own kind of answer. We don't know what it is, Sura said finally. We can say with certainty that it is biological. It is capable of leaving a thermal signature and choosing not to. It is capable of making itself invisible to standard sensors. It may be capable of affecting electronic systems within close range, though that is not confirmed. She paused. What it has not done, in any documented interaction, is cause harm. Its only documented interaction is with coal, the admiral said. Yes. Then we are inferring non-aggression from a sample of one. Yes, Sura said again. The admiral moved on to Oren Fowl, who was sitting with his notes arranged in front of him in a way that suggested he had been thinking about this for the entire journey and was ready to be unpopular. Walk me through the human element, the admiral said. Fowl had a particular manner. He was an older Velhari, slow-moving and deliberate, and he had spent 30 years studying how different species behaved when they encountered each other for the first time. He had a gift for making disturbing things sound purely academic, which was, in Lin's view, sometimes useful and sometimes a problem. The Coalition has known about humanity for 40 years, he began. We have worked alongside them in 4 Coalition engagements. We have a significant body of recorded data on their physiology, their psychology, their military performance, and their social behavior. And in all that time, I would argue that we have made one consistent error in how we understand them. He paused to let that land. We have treated them as a variation of us, as a species that developed along a similar path, but ended up more durable, more aggressive, more tolerant of pain and radiation and hostile environments. We have categorized them as a combat asset, which is accurate, but incomplete. He looked around the table. Earth is not simply a difficult planet. Earth is, by the measurements we use to assess habitability, essentially impossible. 1.0 standard gravity. A magnetic field that does not fully block solar radiation. An atmosphere that is 21% reactive oxygen, which is chemically aggressive to most organic material. A biosphere that is, without exaggeration, entirely made up of things trying to kill each other. Yev, who still had not spoken, made a note for the first time. Humans evolved in an environment where nearly every organism they encountered could harm them, Fowl continued. Not just large predators. Microscopic organisms. Plants. The water. The air, in some regions. They developed immune systems that are, by our standards, almost offensive in their aggression. They developed a physiological stress response that is, in the short term, genuinely impressive. Elevated cardiovascular output, increased pain tolerance, biochemical changes that allow them to continue functioning through injuries that would incapacitate most coalition species. They also developed, and this is the part one want to focus on, a psychological relationship with danger that is unlike anything else in our catalog. He pulled up a record on the room's central screen. Darian's service file. Sergeant Cole has been in active combat situations 14 times. He has been injured on 7 of those occasions. He has never, in any after-action report, been described as panicking. He has been described as reckless. He has been described as calm to the point of unnerving his own allies. On one occasion, a field report from his commanding officer describes him continuing to hold a defensive position for 6 hours, alone, with a dislocated shoulder, eating ration bars, and waiting for relief. The room was quiet. He described this incident in his own report as, and I quote directly, "Not that interesting." He said the position needed holding. He held it. Lynn had read that report. She had read it twice and found it difficult to process both times. My point, Fowl said, is this. Whatever the entity is, we have to consider what it encountered when it entered that compartment. It encountered an organism from a world where everything is a threat. An organism that has evolved, across millions of years, to read danger correctly and respond to it without freezing. And what did that organism do when it found an unknown entity in the dark? He looked at the Admiral. It spoke to it. It gave it space. It went to sleep. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Not uncomfortable. More like the silence after something lands in exactly the wrong way to be ignored. The entity may have encountered nothing like this before, Fel said. Most species, when confronted with an unknown biological presence in an enclosed space, display fear. They attempt to flee. They attempt to fight. They call for help. Cole did none of these things. He acknowledged the presence. He offered it an option that involved no aggression. Then he treated it like a visitor who had chosen not to introduce themselves, which is, I suspect, something that made a kind of sense to a creature that had never been met without fear before. Admiral Seth looked at the service record on the screen for a long moment. And you think that is why it stayed with him? I think it is one reason, Fel said carefully. I think the other reason may be simpler. I think it was curious. We talk about humans as a warrior species, as a death world product, and all of that is accurate. But they are also, and I do not think we appreciate this enough, genuinely curious themselves. They investigate things they do not understand. They keep things they find interesting. They form attachments to other species with a speed and depth that we typically associate with much longer periods of cohabitation. He folded his notes. I think the entity looked at Darian Cole and found something it had never seen before. And I think Darian Cole looked at whatever was in that corner and found something he wanted to know more about. And I think they spent 38 hours getting comfortable with each other in the only way they could, given that neither of them could speak the other's language. Sura spoke for the first time in a while. He told it he wasn't going to hurt it. Yes, Val said. And it believed him. Something kept it in that room for 38 hours when it was clearly capable of leaving at will. He looked at his notes. Yes, I think it believed him. Len gathered the threads of this and tried to hold them together. The entity could pass through hull material. It could vanish from sensors. It could, apparently, affect electronic systems within its vicinity. It was of unknown origin, unknown motive, unknown capability. And it had sat in a corner of a broken ship and listened to a human breathe for a day and a half and decided, for reasons that no one in this room fully understood, to stay. Where is it now? The Admiral asked. We don't know, Len said. But I don't think it is far from Cole. The Admiral nodded slowly. Then she asked the question that had been sitting at the bottom of the room the whole time, unspoken, waiting. What does it want? Fal picked up his notes. He held them for a moment. He set them back down. I don't know, he said. But it has had 40 hours in proximity to a human being and caused him no harm. It has had 2 weeks in proximity to this station and caused no harm. If it wanted something from us, or something from him, I suspect we would know by now. He looked at the Admiral. I think it may simply want to see what he does next. The Admiral closed the briefing 20 minutes later. Len walked back to her office alone. On her desk, there was a formal written request, filed by Sergeant Darian Cole that morning, stamped with the polite persistence of a man who had now been denied the same thing 4 times. He was requesting permission to go outside, in a suit, alone, on the exterior hull of the station. He had not explained why. Len read it twice. Then she took it to the Admiral. 3 senior officers voted against it. The 4th, who was Admiral Rova Seth, overruled them. She did this without explaining herself, which was her right as station command. But she did say one thing before she closed the matter. We have been watching him for 2 weeks, and he has told us nothing. Perhaps it is time to see what he does when we stop asking. The objections were noted and filed and disregarded. Darian was given a Class 4 EVA suit, a standard tether line rated for 6 hours, and a communication channel that went to the observation deck, where Len and Yev were monitoring. He was told the tether was for safety. This was technically true. It also meant that if anything happened, they could pull him back in. He did not comment on either of these things. He suited up in the airlock anteroom without assistance, moving through the equipment checks with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times on worlds where a failed seal meant not coming back. The suit sealed around him. The inner door closed. The pressure equalized. The outer door opened. He stepped onto the exterior of Drell 4. From the observation deck, Len watched on the thermal monitor. The station was a large L-shaped structure, pale on the scanner against the dark of space. Darian appeared as a small, warm outline moving along the upper hull surface, attached by his tether, moving steadily. Not rushing. Not erratic. He walked the way he did everything, with a pace that suggested he was not concerned about any particular outcome. Is he looking for something? Yev asked. I don't know, Len said. He moved along the outer hull for 20 minutes. He passed 3 external relay arrays, two communications dishes, and the rear thermal vent cluster without stopping. He then arrived at a section of hull that had nothing on it. No equipment, no service access, no reason to be there. A flat expanse of station exterior, facing away from the nearest shipping lane, looking out at a dark part of the corridor where no other vessels were currently present. He stopped there. He clipped his tether anchor to a relay strut and simply stood. From inside, on the thermal feed, Len could see the shape of him. 2 arms, 2 legs, a helmet facing outward toward the dark. Standing still, not checking equipment, not doing anything, just standing in vacuum, looking at nothing. For 5 minutes nothing happened. Then he spoke. The communication channel was open. His voice came through clearly, without static. He was not speaking to the observation deck. He was not speaking to anyone on an open frequency. He was speaking quietly, into the dark, to something that was not there or was not visible. "I don't know if you can hear me out here," he said. "I don't know if you breathe vacuum or if you just like the dark, but I thought this was probably more your kind of space than theirs." Silence. The stars. The quiet hiss of the suit's air recycler. On the thermal monitor, every sensor along the outer hull of Drell 4 returned normal readings. Nothing. Just Darien, warm and solid in his suit, standing on the hull. Len had not realized she had been holding her breath until she let it out. Then every thermal sensor on the outer hull spiked simultaneously. It was brief, less than 2 seconds. But it was not a malfunction. The readings were clean, the sensors were cross-confirmed, and the spike was localized to a point approximately 1 meter to Darien's left. A thermal event consistent with a body that radiated significant heat and then simply stopped, like a hand pressed to cold glass, and then withdrawn. Darien turned his helmet, just slightly, to the left, as if he had heard something. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They're scared of you. I understand that. They are a little scared of me too. They hide it better than they think they do, but not as well as they think they do." He paused. "I am not going to tell them what you are. Mostly because I do not know, but also because I do not think it is mine to say." The thermal spike came again. Longer this time. 5 seconds. The same location. 1 meter to his left. Present and then gone. On the observation deck, nobody said anything. Yev had stopped writing. Len had both hands flat on the console, watching the monitor, not moving. Darien nodded. It was a small, deliberate movement, the kind a person made when they had heard something and understood it. He nodded to something beside him that no sensor could hold, that no camera could resolve, that left no footprint and no shadow, only a brief warmth in the cold of space. Then he unclipped his tether anchor, turned, and walked back along the hull toward the airlock. He came through the airlock 4 minutes later and removed his helmet in the anteroom. Len was there. She had walked very quickly from the observation deck, and she was aware that her composure was less perfect than she would have liked. Yev was behind her. 3 station security officers were behind Yev, slightly uncertain about why they were there. Darien looked at Len. His expression was the expression she had come to associate with him. Patient, clear, not particularly forthcoming. "You can stop looking," he said. "For the entity?" Len asked. "For a threat," he said. He unclipped the suit seals at his collar and began working through the dissuit procedure. "It is not a threat." "How do you know?" It was Yev who asked, stepping forward. Yev was tactical. Yev needed a reason. Darien considered this. He considered it seriously, which Len had noticed he did with most questions. He gave them actual thought before he answered, rather than answering from the nearest available platitude. "Because it had 38 hours to decide whether I was one," he said. "And it decided I was not. And it did not leave." He set the helmet on the bench beside him. "Things that want to hurt you do not stay." He finished removing the suit. He handed it to the equipment officer, thanked her by name, because he had apparently learned every crew member's name in the 2 weeks he had been on the station, and walked back toward the habitat corridor. In the biology lab at the far end of the station, Dr. Surameld was running a final round of analysis on the cellular material she had collected from the crash site. She had been preserving the samples carefully, watching their slow decomposition, trying to extract as much data as possible before they broke down completely. At the exact moment Darien walked back through the inner airlock door, every sample in her lab vanished. Not degraded, not dissolved, not processed by any chemical or biological mechanism she had been monitoring. 1 second they were there. The next second the culture plates were empty, clean, as though nothing had ever been on them. She stood very still in her lap. Then she picked up her recorder and said, "Time of complete sample dissolution, 1847 station time." She paused. No mechanism observed. She filed the report. She included a note at the bottom that she marked personal, which meant it would be read by Len and the Admiral and nobody else. The note said, "I do not think it was afraid of us finding it. I think it let us find what it wanted us to find. And when it was done, it cleaned up." Back in the habitat corridor, Darian stopped at the small galley station, made himself a cup of something warm, and took it back to his bunk. He sat on the edge of the mattress and drank it slowly and looked at the wall. Len reviewed the EVA suit telemetry that evening. All readings normal. Suit integrity good. No anomalies. Except one. The oxygen consumption log. The suit carried enough air for 6 hours. He had been outside for 38 minutes. The log showed 94 minutes of breathable air had been consumed during that time. The suit had only registered one occupant. The air had been shared. The formal inquiry lasted 4 days. It was held in a sealed chamber at Coalition Fleet Command, on a station 3 transit jumps from Drell 4, which told Len everything she needed to know about how seriously the upper echelons were taking this, and how little they intended to do about it publicly. She gave her testimony. Sura gave hers. Admiral Seth gave a brief and carefully worded account of events on Drell 4. Dr. Oren Fowl submitted his psychological assessment in writing, which was unusual, and Len suspected deliberate. Written testimony did not require the witness to be present when people began asking uncomfortable questions. Darian was interviewed twice. He answered every question clearly and without visible strain. He confirmed that he had been aboard the Relentless Star, that the ship had suffered a catastrophic failure, that he had sealed himself in a compartment and waited for rescue. He confirmed that he had spent 38 hours alone. The investigative panel noted this word. Alone. Nobody pushed on it. The findings were issued 6 days later. The Relentless Star had been destroyed by an unclassified internal event. Cause, undetermined. The audio anomaly in Sergeant Cole's helmet recording was logged as equipment artifact, which Lynn knew was false, and the panel almost certainly knew was false, and everyone had silently agreed would be the official position. The biological material collected from the crash site was classified at the highest level, which meant it effectively did not exist. The external hull sensor spikes at Drell 4 were attributed to cosmic ray interference. The oxygen discrepancy in the EVA suit telemetry was noted as a sensor calibration error. The inquiry closed. No recommendations were issued. No further investigation was ordered. The entity was never named, never described in any document that would circulate, never given a threat classification or a species designation. It was, by the official record, nothing at all. Len saved everything she had to a personal archive that she kept on a private drive and did not connect to the Coalition network. Darian was reassigned 3 weeks after the inquiry closed. He had requested a frontier posting. He had asked for something at the edge of mapped space, somewhere with a lot of open sky and not many people. The posting he was given was a scout assignment in the Ashfield corridor, the same corridor where the Relentless Star had gone down, which Len suspected was not a coincidence, and which no one in the reassignment office appeared to find worth commenting on. In the weeks between the inquiry and his departure, 3 things happened on Drell for that Len noted privately. A coolant seal in the station's secondary reactor had failed silently at 0300 one morning. Coolant seals failed occasionally, which was expected. What was not expected was that the failure had been detected and the system had rerouted itself to a backup circuit before the automated alarm had time to trigger. The maintenance crew reviewed the logs. The reroute had been initiated manually from a terminal that was not logged in at the time. The sequence of commands was correct. They could not find who had entered them. A supply drone running an automated route to the outer bay had deviated from its programmed path 12 minutes before reaching a debris cluster that no sensor in the area had detected. The deviation was precise enough to avoid the cluster by exactly the minimum safe margin. The drone's navigation log showed no manual override and no autopilot correction. It had simply turned, as if it knew. A medical monitoring system in the habitat wing had triggered a cardiac alert for a Velhari engineer named Bovicel at 0600 on a Tuesday. The alert had routed through to the medical bay before any symptom had presented. The doctors had run tests. They found the beginning of a vascular event, early enough that intervention was straightforward. They told Bovicelle that the monitor had caught it remarkably early. Bovicelle said she had not heard any alert. She had simply woken up with the feeling that she should go to the medical bay. The automated alert log showed the alert had been triggered at 0558. Bovicelle had woken up, by her own account, at 0557. Len looked at all three of these incidents. She looked at the times. She looked at the patterns. She added them to her private archive under a folder she had labeled simply, Activity. She did not submit this file. On the day of Darian's departure, she found him in the main corridor near the docking bay, kit bag over one shoulder, waiting for the airlock to cycle. He looked the same as he always looked, unhurried, present, slightly too calm for the circumstances. He had said brief goodbyes to several station crew members by name, including two technicians who had clearly not expected him to remember their names and had been visibly moved by the fact that he did. Len stopped him. She had not planned what she was going to say. She had a list of questions she had been carrying for weeks, and she looked at him and understood, clearly, that none of them were the right one. Not the ones about the entity. Not the ones about the compartment. Not the ones about the EVA suit and the shared air. She asked the only question that felt true. Are you afraid of it? He was quiet for a moment. He shifted the kit bag on his shoulder. He thought about it the way she had come to understand he thought about things. Actually, carefully, without the performance of consideration. No, he said. Then he said, Are you afraid of me? She did not answer. She had thought, going into this conversation, that she would answer that question easily if it came up. She had thought the answer was no, because she was a professional and she had worked alongside humans before, and she was not the kind of person who let biology dictate response. She had been wrong about that. Not because Darian was threatening. He had never been threatening. But because something about standing next to him in a corridor, knowing what she knew, understanding what he was in the full context of his species and his world and his 38 hours in a broken ship, made her feel the particular kind of quiet that came from being very close to something that was simply built differently than anything she had frameworks for. He nodded, once, at her silence. Not unkindly. Safe travels, investigator, he said, and walked through the airlock. She stood in the corridor after he was gone and thought about the sound of two organisms breathing in the same dark space. She thought about an entity that could pass through hull material and vanish from sensors, choosing, instead, to stay. She thought about what it must have looked like, from whatever the entity's perspective was. A large warm creature in the wreck of a ship, moving around in the dark without fear, saying you don't have to stay in the corner, saying that's fine too, and then lying down and sleeping as if none of it was a problem. She thought she understood why it had not left. 3 months later, she received a brief automated data packet from the Frontier Relay Network. It was a routine telemetry archive from a scout vessel operating in the Ashfield Corridor, one of hundreds of similar packets the relay network transmitted daily. There was nothing unusual about the transmission header. Nothing flagged. Nothing marked for attention. She would not have looked at it at all except that the scout vessel's identification code matched Darian's posting. She opened the packet out of habit. She skimmed the telemetry. Life support normal. Navigation normal. Comms normal. She almost closed it. Then she opened the helmet audio file. She had not expected there to be one. Scout EVA logs were only kept for active excursions. He was not on an excursion. He was in his vessel, in the corridor, doing nothing. But the helmet was logging. He had left it running. She did not know if he had done this by accident or on purpose. There was the sound of him breathing, steady and familiar, the same rhythm she had listened to for hours in his crash recording. The slight shift in his breath that meant he was awake and quiet and thinking. The sound of him moving something on a console, the click of a navigation screen. A long silence. Then, beneath his breathing, soft and slow and unmistakably present, the second pattern. Still there. Still with him. The second cup of coffee on his console, cooling at the same rate as his, visible in the ship's internal camera log for the 9 seconds before the camera cycled to the next angle and did not return. The log autosaved, the way all logs autosaved, faithfully and without opinion, a record of everything that had happened and nothing that it meant. Len listened to both of them breathing together in the quiet of the corridor for a long moment. Then she closed the file, put it in her private archive, and went back to work. Nobody was looking at the file tonight. And in the asphalted corridor, in the dark at the edge of the mapped world, the scout vessel moved on through unmapped space with its two-person crew, one of whom had a name on the manifest, and one of whom had chosen something rarer, to be known only by the sound of breathing in the dark and a warmth that no scanner could hold. Indy.